Shalom from Jerusalem. The Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security is very pleased to have today as our guest Professor Kostas Ifantis. He is a professor of international relations at Athens University. He is also the president of the Institute of International Relations at the university. He has served at many universities, including Harvard, Bradford University in UK. He is also policy-oriented, and the Ministry of of Foreign Affairs, the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs, asked him to head the Center for Policy Analysis and Planning, and he's still a consultant to this institution. And I'm sure you can read more of him on the internet, and also on the many publications he wrote. Today, Professor Ifantis will talk about the impact of the war in Ukraine and the Middle East war on area which Greece and Israel share, the Eastern Mediterranean. It's your floor, Kostas.
Dear Ephraim, dear friends, shalom from Jerusalem to those who are not with us. Before I start, let me express my most sincere support to the families of the victims of the October 7 attack, and of course, let me wish from the bottom of my heart the safe return of the hostages as soon as possible. As an outsider, what happened that day is because I've seen videos, I've seen pictures. What happened that day is beyond the comprehension of someone outside Israel. Some people claim they understand. I don't. I cannot claim to understand what it's like to be the target of people who want to exterminate your community, of being denied the right to exist, and not for the first time in history. So that's why I feel so privileged to have been invited to talk in Jerusalem. I'm grateful. And at the same time, let me also tell you that I feel weak. Okay, I feel really, what can I say that can be of real interest, and what can I really say that can sound as novel to an audience like this, so knowledgeable, and an audience that has the developments of the region in its under its skin. I suggested to Ephraim that I should be speaking about Greek foreign policy and national strategy, but he said no. Talk about this Mediterranean and the impact of war. So be it. Let me my
disciplined soldier.
Yes, sir. So my presentation is structured roughly in two parts. The first one is an overview of the state of affairs before October 7 and before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the second part is after, and I will conclude with a brief comment of what the collapse of the Assad regime might mean. So let me start by reiterate the trend lines in the region, the perennial trend lines in the region. Okay, religious intolerance, cultural hatred, nationalism, popular unrest, Iraq, failed states or weak states like Iraq, Lebanon, and of course revisionist states like Iran, like Turkey. So it's getting harder and harder to govern some of these countries, to govern some of these societies. They have been destabilized because of Arab Spring, some of them, because of COVID, because of chronic corruption, because of underdevelopment. That it is they suffer from chronic structural deficiencies as far as development is concerned, and to some degree, they suffer from a lack of progress towards transiting to some form of democratic politics and polities, if I may. In addition to this, there has been uncertainty about external drivers, especially the last, I would say, since the Obama administration. There have been questions about U.S. strategy and the general standing in Europe and in the wider Middle East, although they have not reduced their military presence in the region. There are questions about the Russian presence until a few weeks ago or few days ago. The Russian presence was a fact of life. The fact of life was the return of Russia in Syria and in Libya. And there is the question of the impact of the Ukraine war, the question about China expanding their footprint, etc., etc. And of course, there is a host of functional problems and challenges: the radical violence, Islam and terrorism, leaderships that are incapable and corrupt. Some societies are leaderless. And all these account, of course, for a very complex geopolitical landscape. The region remains what has always been a geopolitical flashpoint due to its position at the nexus of Europe, Asia, and Africa. It remains an epicenter of great power competition and a cauldron of conflicts. Remember, East Mediterranean marked the spot where the US began pushing back against the spread of Soviet influence at the outset of the Cold War, and it remained a focus of US grand strategy until the collapse of the Soviet Union. Now, the current state of play, as I said, before the two wars, since roughly 2011, we have been witnessing a geopolitical realignment. And I will briefly attempt to lay out some of the changes that are taking place or have been taking place and their implications for regional security and stability. The first is something that we keep talking about, is the profound lack or the absence of a coherent US strategy. Or let me put it in different terms, a sense that the region is not among Washington's priorities. So if you look at the trajectory of American approaches to the region, then you get a strong feeling of a continuous doctrinal limbo, from Bush's regime change policy to Obama's not in our interest doctrine when it came to Syria or to the upheaval in Egypt, to Trump's transactionalism with all its shortcomings and virtues at the same time, and to Biden's outlook of I don't know what to do. At least that was my impression.
The lack of consistency.
So yes, Americans or some Americans claim that India-Pacific is the priority, that the United States have always been a Pacific power rather than an Atlantic or a European power. But at the end of the day, it is at least in my reading, it's the most stupid thing to do is to ignore Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East. So there is an American hands-off approach since at least the early 2010s. And that has contributed to the collapse of the security order, with revisionist threats and rivalry shaping the international politics of the region. The result has been a failure to counter threats like the Iranian threat, the failure to combat terrorism and religious extremism, and the failure to enhance regional security, in particular Israel's security. Again, my take is that it has also failed to deprive Moscow of regional footholds. This doctrinal, how can I put it, myopia, I think it is responsible for the erosion of US strategic posture, at least until the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the October 7th genocidal attack by Hamas in Israel, and the war since. These two events, I think they compelled the United States to increase its deployments and to act as what they should have been all the time, the ultimate deterrent power. Okay, and in an area where deterrence, collapsed. Those of us who have read, I keep, suggesting this book, William Burns's Back Channel, which is all about the administration's policy in the Middle East, know what I mean. The second major catalyst of regional change is the profound transformation of Turkey's regional posture under Erdogan, especially since 2009, when he walked out on the late Simon Peres in Davos. This transformation is the key shift affecting the strategic balance and generating security anxieties and competition in some parts of Eastern Mediterranean, especially in the Aegean and in Eastern Mediterranean, and not only between Turkey, Greece, and Cyprus, but also Egypt, but also Israel, etc., etc. Turkey has moved from being a rather reliable NATO member to a very unpredictable maverick ally whose foreign policy is a peculiar mix of Islamic values, nationalist overtones, and nostalgia for an imperial order with Ankara at the center. So Erdogan and his party, AKP, considered the Islamic world as a vital component of Turkey's grand strategy. Their narrative is that Turkey has for too long neglected its historic and cultural ties, as well as its diplomatic, economic, and political relations in the critical system of East Mediterranean, Middle East, and Northern Africa. For the AKP, Turkey's Ottoman heritage is conceived in terms of historical responsibility towards the Middle East, and accords it a sort of exceptionalism in the region, a powerful sense of a mission to provide a new a new order. New order, of course, replacing the old order of the US-made order with Israel at its center, and not only Israel, of course. So it's a neo-Ottoman strategic design with a blend of Islamic anti-colonial and anti-imperialist discourses. So to that end, Turkey has readily employed war-scaring tactics against Greece, against Cyprus, even against Israel very recently, and of course, gunboat diplomacy. 2020 is not, it's not very, it's not in the distant past where Greek and Turkish Navy, when we experienced a naval standoff in the Mediterranean, and we came that close to something more than that. And then it's Ankara's attempt towards a very, how can I put it, an emancipation, a strategic emancipation that upsets the balance of power. So its acquisition of advanced S-400 air defenses from Russia has been the most vivid indication of Turkey's ambivalence in fulfilling its strategic roles as a pro-Western bulwark in the region of NATO's southeastern flank and a bridge between Europe and the Middle East. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has brought this perception of a Turkey in limbo into an even sharper focus. The third change is related to Iranian and Russian efforts to gain footholds in the region. And that did bring with it the return of a high-stakes geopolitical rivalry. Until the war against Israel, these footholds posed challenges for regional strategies and security. As you know better than anybody else, Iran's designs began long before the Syrian conflict, of course. It has been the patron of Hamas, the sponsor of Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Syria, the Houthis, as well as Hezbollah, its largest and most powerful proxy. Tehran reinforced this by equipping these terrorist organizations with tens of thousands of unguided rockets and precision long-range missiles, including anti-ship cruise missiles to target maritime traffic, ports, and offshore energy infrastructure. Iran thereby accumulated, before October 7, a pivotal influence over countries on Israel's borders as part of an overarching plan to consolidate a land bridge stretching from its own borders through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon to the Mediterranean. This gradually generated a series of proxy wars of high and low intensity, as Iranian-supported terrorist groups sought to exploit the Syrian civil war to establish a second front against Israel and transfer arms to Hezbollah. Tehran's deep interference also turned Lebanon into a big venue for regional competition and conflict. The Iranian regime's role in Syria and Lebanon was complemented by Russia's involvement beyond anything it enjoyed during the Cold War. 10 years ago, Moscow reactivated its fifth Skarda under the new guise of the operational formation of the Russian Navy in the Mediterranean Sea. Against the background of the US's failure to intervene in 2013 in Syria, Moscow identified the geopolitical vacuum and it filled it by deploying military forces in Syria in 2015. In 2017, it made its military presence in Syria permanent through long-term leases of the Khmeimim Air Base and the Tartus Naval Base. The Russians made their long-term intentions clear by deploying advanced air defense systems across Syria and on sea-based platforms. For almost 7 years, Russia essentially took over Syria's airspace, aiming at challenging their superiority of NATO in Eastern Mediterranean over a significant swath of that region. For sure, Russia could not aspire to a hegemonic role, but what it did was to try and alter the balance of power and shape outcomes in war zones with its readiness to deploy military and paramilitary forms of power. It was not really a grand strategy, but an opportunistic approach to restore some of its global position and challenge the US and its allies. What was even more important for Russia's position in the Middle East after the Arab uprising was for Moscow to be seen as a status quo power committed to preserve ties with the regimes and royal families of the region rather than supporting forces for political change, in contrast to what previous American administrations did. The fourth change has been the strategic merging of the Gulf with Eastern Mediterranean. The synergies between the two theaters have grown substantially in recent years. Developments ranging from Libya's civil war to the Abraham Accords have created a space in which the interests of East Mediterranean states such as Greece, Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel, and the Gulf states like the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia seem more aligned than ever before. Yesterday's developments, yesterday's news is a testament to that, I think. So relations with Israel have improved dramatically. Also, the last 5 years saw a major step forward in political and security cooperation between Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates on the one hand, and Greece and Egypt on the other. In March 2021, Saudi fighter jets and transport planes flew to Greece to participate in a large-scale joint military exercise, the first of its kind for the two air forces. Later the same year, the two agreed that Greece would loan Patriot missile units to Saudi Arabia to help protect critical infrastructure against attacks, mainly from the Houthis in Yemen. And the Saudis not only financed deployments of the system and the team, but also upgraded the system for Greece. Relations between the UAE and Greece have warmed to an even greater extent. In August 2020, at the heart of the crisis with Turkey, and 1 week after the announcement of the normalization agreements with Israel, Abu Dhabi sent fighter jets and ground crews to Greece to participate in a joint exercise. Since then, regular high-level political and military meetings are part of the cooperation framework, which includes strategic partnership agreements with a very significant security component. On top of these developments, the Gulf states' outreach has always been geo-economic. They are wielding their financial clout more strategically and more effectively than in the past. Okay, I don't really think of them as shapers of the region, but their geopolitical and geoeconomic engagements will keep increasing. Let me now turn to the impact of the two wars in the geopolitics of the region and beyond. And let me start with the war in Ukraine. For a European like myself, the most important geopolitical milestone post-World War II has been the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the USSR and the other communist regimes. I believe that the Russian invasion and the subsequent war in Ukraine will be considered as the second most important geopolitical benchmark in the years to come. For most Europeans, it is the end of the peace dividends we thought we had achieved after 1989, 1990. 30 years ago, we thought we could focus on managing and expanding globalization, growth, green transition, and lifting people out of poverty. And we were successful, and to a very large extent. But now, we find ourselves struggling to prioritize defense and security spending, and this against the scenario of US disengagement from Europe and European security. Let me make a few very brief points. First, although I'm an existential optimist, in the case of Ukraine, I cannot see a plausible scenario in the medium run, at least, where Russia reintegrates with Europe. And of course, I don't believe that Putin emerges from this war stronger compared to where he was before the invasion. Although things from his point of view might not be that bad. The Russian position in the global economy and security has been compromised with NATO enlargement. Look at the map. The Gulf of Bothnia and the Gulf of Finland are NATO seas now, with the enlargement of NATO, Finland and Sweden. And the Barents Sea up in the Arctic North is also heavily NATO. Second, the decoupling we are seeing from Europe and the US could be long-term, although I don't wish to see that. But even if the war stops tomorrow, trust will not return. Even if President Trump hugs Vladimir Putin, mistrust will be there. Western corporations will not go back to Russia, not with Putin in power anyway. The decision to increase defense spending in Europe will not change. Also, the process of cleansing our energy mix from Russia, gas and oil, will go on even at a great cost, short to medium term. Third, NATO has acquired a renewed purpose and mission. I've already talked about enlargement. And it has consolidated its presence along Russian near abroad, and is stronger today than 3 years ago when Emmanuel Macron declared it clinically dead. Of course, there is the Trump factor. Okay? How is he going to manage the US standing in NATO? No doubt he thinks that the American commitment to the European security is a source of weakness for the United States. But a decision to pull out of NATO won't be easy, and I can imagine that such a decoupling will not be without strong reactions domestically. What, in my view, Donald Trump seems to ignore is that NATO has been a pillar of American strength and influence at a very low cost indeed. If there is a vacuum of power in Europe, it will be filled one way or another. Fourth, the UK-EU relationship is much smoother and more functional today than at any point since Brexit because of the war in Ukraine. Fifth, China. China has welcomed the alignments with Russia. They have, and why is that? Because they have turned the Russians to a supplicant economically, in terms of energy, financially, in terms of transactions, and lately technologically. This has, of course, big geopolitical implications long term. Russia will never be a pariah state. It is too big and too important for that. And the global south will not treat it as a pariah. India, Brazil, South Africa will continue to engage with Russia. And the West must balance the mistrust of Putin with the geopolitical imperative to prevent the deepening of alignment with China, and that's the ultimate dilemma. At the same time, the Chinese do not want a second Cold War as much as they realign with Putin. They do not see a potential decoupling of their economy from the West as in being in their interest. Again, the black swan here might be Trump's tariff policy and the extent to which he means what he says about waging a trade war with China. That will definitely affect Chinese strategic thinking. And there is also, and that's the sixth point, there's also a risk of a second order decoupling because of the war in Ukraine. The alignment with China, the Russian alignment with China, and the close military cooperation with North Korea risks a decoupling from Japan and South Korea for Russia. The current Japanese Prime Minister, Shigeru Ishiba, is at least as hawkish as in his orientation toward China and a strong supporter of the US-Japan alliance. He has suggested that Japan's self-defense forces could be placed alongside the American forces in Guam to strengthen the deterrence capability of the Japan-US. He has also floated the idea of a Pacific NATO, but he has not come back to it after he was elected. Japan has been providing support for Ukraine, including military support. They have also taken a number of Ukrainian refugees in, which is unheard for Japan. South Korea has been strongly, of course, anti-China. The current political turmoil will not affect the basic parameters of South Korean strategic preferences. The vast majority of South Koreans are in favor of acquiring nuclear capabilities. Seoul wants to acquire a new THAAD system, and I think that they will most probably get it with Trump, and they want to rebuild the relationship with Tokyo. The close military relationship between Russia and North Korea, with North Korean soldiers fighting in Kursk, is viewed with dismay in Seoul and in other parts of Southeastern Asia. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, as it has been implied, has been the aid provided to the Russian war effort by Iran, North Korea, and China. Over the past 2 years, all three countries have become critical enablers of Moscow war in Ukraine. Since Russia's invasion, Moscow has deployed more than 3,700 Iranian-designed drones. Russia now produces at least 300 of its own each month and is working with Iran on plans to build a new drone factory inside Russia. North Korea has sent Russia ballistic missiles and more than 3 million rounds of ammunition. China, apart from purchasing Russian oil and gas and filling up Putin's coffers, have been providing vast amounts of warfighting technology, from semiconductors and electronic devices to radar and communication jamming equipment and jet fighter parts. The support from these three has strengthened Russia's position on the battlefield, undermined Western attempts to isolate Moscow, and harmed Ukraine's war prospects. The four have been coordinating their policies before 2022, but now their convergence is creating what Andrea Kendall Taylor and Richard Fontaine called in their paper in Foreign Affairs last May an axis of upheaval, a development that is fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape. Yes, the group is not an alliance, but when they cooperate, their actions have far greater effect than the sum of their individual capabilities. And they share the aim of weakening the US and the democratic West, and this is a strong adhesive. China and Russia have been strengthening their partnership for over a generation now, but this trend has accelerated rapidly since 2014, and since the invasion in 2022, their convergence is even more substantial. Moscow is now Iran's largest source of foreign investment. Russia exports to Iran rose by 27% in 2022. Moscow has been sharing intelligence with Tehran and its proxies at least until very recently, and has defended them in the UN Security Council. Moscow has also released millions of dollars in North Korean assets that previously sat frozen in Russian banks in compliance with Security Council sanctions. Let me now turn to the Mediterranean and the Middle East for a final comment on the impact of the October 7 attack and the subsequent 2.5 front war, as I have described it. The war has signaled the near collapse, the near complete breakdown of deterrence strategies. Because of the attempt against Israel, the genocidal attempt against Israel, the region is no longer bound by established rules of engagement and modes of deterrence. At least until the security of Israel is restored and the threats have been dealt with, the situation remains very, very volatile. The US mobilization has played a role in containing the conflict against those who might have been tempted to take advantage of the situation. No need to remind this audience that this was never a theoretical proposition. It was October the 8th when Hezbollah began missile attacks on northern Israel that forced at least 60,000 Israelis from their homes. And also Iranian-backed militias in Iraq repeatedly targeted US forces based in Iraq and Syria. In November 2023, the Houthis launched an ongoing campaign of attacks on more than 100 merchant ships in the Red Sea in an attempt to disrupt global trade. And of course, the Houthis have also targeted Israel with drone attacks. And although Israel has responded with decisive military campaigns, which have degraded Hamas and Hezbollah operational capabilities, rebuilding deterrence has been costly and bloody, and it is an ongoing task. Had my talk here have been held 2 weeks ago, my final remarks would have been quite different. But the collapse of the Assad regime in Syria has, requires a new treatise, if you like. It promises to be a source of massive change until, at least in terms of expectations throughout the region. Today, things look rather different, and the uncertainty over the nature, prospects, and intentions of those in command in Damascus is fueling anxiety. Although it is rather early for a credible analysis, it seems that there are two main reasons for Assad's downfall, and that would determine the future, at least short term. One is Turkey, and the other is Israel's campaign against the terrorists of Hamas and Hezbollah. Turkey has provided indirect and direct assistance to HTS for some time now. The Turkish military presence in Idlib has deterred Syrian government forces for a long time now and has allowed the group to gain legitimacy in that part of Syria, as well as to prepare undisturbed for its advance to Damascus. With Assad gone, Erdogan feels that the balance of power has shifted in its favor. Now Turkey can rebalance its relationship with Russia. The latter's standing has been compromised. If Moscow loses its military footprint in Syria, Russia's support for its operations in Africa, particularly Libya, will be a logistical nightmare. In 2014, when the Turks shot down a Russian fighter jet, I remarked and forgive my self-reference, that Russia lost a plane and won a country, Syria, over Turkey. Now the tables have turned. Also, Assad's collapse might alter Turkey's relations with Iran. In Syria, and that's not necessarily bad news. No? In Syria, Iranian-backed forces and Iranian paramilitaries coordinated with YPG in fighting ISIS, with the forces backed by Turkey, sidelined for some time. But it was also Israel whose actions led to the collapse of Assad. The defeat of Hamas and its ousting from Gaza, the extermination of Hezbollah's leadership, has resulted in the destruction of the Iranian-led axis of resistance, in inverted commas. The destruction now is almost complete. Syria was a critical conduit in Iran's strategy of supporting terrorist groups and proxies across the region. Now its ability to project influence and power is thwarted, at least for the foreseeable future. It is true that Israel is reshaping the region, but it remains to be seen whether the prevailing of Turkey is good news. For Erdogan, there is a chance for reconciliation with the incoming Trump administration as well. Ankara wants US troops out of Syria, and Assad's fall could facilitate Trump's urge to bring them home. President Trump immediately stated that the incoming President Trump immediately stated that the US should have nothing to do with the change in Syria. So a deal between Trump and Erdogan is not out of question. In such a deal, Turkey commits to containing ISIS and the US leaves the country. In such a scenario, the Kurds are left in the cold. All the above, provided the transition is smooth. And there are plenty of reasons why this can turn ugly again for Syria. The challenges of state building, state rebuilding are colossal. The Libya and Iraq cases have little room for optimism, leave little room for optimism. Israel fully understands this and is taking steps to quarantine itself, the turmoil that might still engulf Syria. Let me wrap up by offering a concluding remark that goes beyond the two walls. It seems that the issue of global deterrence will dominate the years ahead. Great powers are competing in Europe, the Middle East, and in Asia, and the potential of armed conflict is not negligible. Crises are emerging in which middle class or middle powers, small powers, and non-state violent actors collide. Deterrence is more elusive than ever. That is why the US role is critical. Great powers don't just live. Great powers don't just mind their own business. They have to try and shape the environment. In Ukraine, that means that the US and Europe must address three interrelated questions as they try to stop the war. First, how do you prevent Putin from thinking he's won? Because he will declare victory, but how you alter his thinking. Second, how to rebuild Ukraine, and at the same time, how to contain Moscow from trying again for the third phase. 2014, Crimea, 2022, is there room? How do you prevent him from the third round? Third, what kind of security guarantees are the United States and Europe willing to give to Ukraine for the day after? All this is down to how the Trump administration shapes the US position and standing in the war. Force and its applications, we know, has limits. It's not just because they need to respond by force to contingencies. Unlimited force application is a prescription for getting involved without end, as the problems breed new problems and so forth. The US are not dominant, but they are preeminent. and they need, and we, Europe at least, we need, and I think you in the Middle East, or we in Eastern Mediterranean, we need US preeminence. Without US preeminence, we will see the world further fragment into conflicts like the ones in Ukraine and the Middle East. And we have to remember that the impact of geography as a restraining factor has gone down as a result of the outreach that these days is infinitely greater than in the past because of technology, as well as because of the rapid contamination of groups with a passion for violence and revenge. We need to constantly adjust our thinking to what it means to be dealing with global complexity, reinforced by a multiplication of more often than not incompatible narratives, Western, Oriental, Southern, secular, religious, etc. We need to learn how others react to what we are trying to accomplish in a world more fragmented, more interwoven, and more violent in some respects. And this is a massive challenge. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kostas, for this comprehensive review. And if you have any questions, please use the chat function. And my first question is, you emphasize the role of the United States, rightly so. But what happens if Trump doesn't deliver? What do we do, the Greeks, the Israelis, if we see growing isolationist impulses in the foreign policy of the United States? This is
it's it's easy to answer. The world remains a system of self-help. So we have to take care of our security. It's going to be hard, especially in Europe. You know how to do it, but especially in Europe, we have forgotten what it means to rely on ourselves for our security. But we have to learn fast. We don't have time.
What do you want?
We keep in Europe. We keep discussing the security and defense emancipation of the European Union for over a generation now, since the collapse of the Soviet. Please, thank you very much. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, and we have failed spectacularly to not to deliver, to convince ourselves that we need to do something. One hopes that in the face of such a volatile environment, in the face of a revisionist threat by Russia, a revisionist threat that has been demonstrated in the battlefield, not in theory, that we'll get our act together in Europe, at least, as I said. It is if you think of European capabilities, potential capabilities, they're huge. We produce everything, or we can produce everything, but we don't. We have the knowledge, the know-how, the capabilities to produce everything from fifth generation airplanes to just mention it. The Germans can produce everything. They produce everything, but not for the German army. The Americans, they have one aviation, military aviation industry in essence. In Europe, we have 1, 2, 3, 4. It doesn't make sense, and at the same time, we don't have the the airlift, strategic airlift capabilities and strategic transportation capabilities, not even 1/10 of what the Americans have.
But the willingness to fight.
So that I disagree with Marxists who claim that you fight when you have nothing to lose but your chains. I think when you have a lot to lose, then you fight, and you know this. So this is my answer. We need to find it.
That's what you want.
And I hope that we have by now we are beyond thinking, and we have scenarios, we have plans to be executed.
Hillel,
I just want, basically, what's happening in Syria is that Turkey won and Russia lost. I mean, Russia lost along with the Iranians, and that's why they're evacuating. And Syrian TV just walked in to part of the Tartus base. It was completely open, and people were walking around, and just immediately afterwards.
what's the question?
So the question is, so on the one hand, so Russia is being rolled back, but then Turkey is a winner. To what extent Turkey will be the new revisionist power, immediate power, which affects both of us. I mean, Greece and Israel. I mean, coming down from your wonderful world analysis, more to focus on the immediate,
to micro, from
the Eastern Mediterranean.
Yes, as I said, for me it's too early to judge, but from a Greek standpoint, Turkey has always been a revisionist power, an aggressive NATO, and it has been even more so, since the Turkish national strategy, narrative, dogma, has been one of a hegemonic power shaping developments in the wider, from Libya to the Gulf. Actually, remember, Turkey has a base in Qatar.
Yeah.
Okay, and it was instrumental in the survival of Qatar when the Saudis were very much contemplating the how can I put it, the strangulation of the Qataris, not so. So they have a military presence in Djibouti. Well, Djibouti is a supermarket for military bases. Everybody has a base in Djibouti, but Turkey has a base there. It has intervened militarily in Libya. They have been they've created this buffer zone in Syria. They have intervened militarily in and out in northern Iraq. We know they have supported jihadist groups in Syria as a force, as a bulwark against the Kurds. So yes, there might, you could see a future where Turkey, Ankara, and President Erdogan feels emboldened and feels that Syria is only the first step because what is the neo-Ottoman discourse and his belief system is that the former colonial powers as if Turkey was not an imperial power, but let's forget about it. The Turkey would do whatever it takes to force them out, okay, and re-energize Islam, hopefully moderate Islam, as the main structural element in a new Middle Eastern order. So yes, Turkey, at least now, a few days after the change in Damascus, is vindicated after since 2011. It's now 13 years of supporting anti-Assad forces. But as I said, at least for me, I would wait a few months to see whether Turkey's support, Turkey's aid to the new regime is enough for it to consolidate itself, and hopefully they are HTS and the other Islamist groups in Syria are more sincere than the Taliban in Afghanistan.
As a slight follow-up.
In being more tolerant and and more moderate.
Shmuel,
But this is wishful,
what's your question, Shmuel?
Yeah. First of all, let me compliment you. It's a long time since I had heard such a, say, panoramic
Here.
view. I mean, analysis of what's going on, and especially it's interesting, comes from a Greek point of view, because Greece that's why I imagine Prime wanted you to speak, is playing in both areas. But let me continue this thing about Turkey, and I'll connect both your previous answer with Hill analysis and say, look, we know that in balance of power, when there is a hegemonic power, there's always an alliance that will stand up. And that's what you really said. Even if the United States is less involved, Europe will have to balance Russia. I mean, that's natural, and it happened since, I don't know, since when.
Otherwise they bend the knee.
Europe did it when France started to be hegemonic, and then when Germany wanted to be hegemonic, when Russia wanted. It's always you have a counter.
But it's not deterministic.
It's not deterministic, but it works.
And it was always
when it didn't work, ultimately it worked. Even when they didn't, when Hitler, ultimately they got together and balanced.
We got together to fight.
Yeah, right.
Hopefully.
Ultimately, but let me go now to change, and now I'll go to the Middle East. The Middle East, we have Turkey now doing this. Maybe now, if Iran is really weakened and they don't, and somehow the nuclear issue is contained, Turkey is now really the new hegemonic power, and I presume, according to this logic, that we'll have a counterbalance, and this will be Egypt, us, and Saudi Arabia. Well, I mean, especially if Turkey is a Muslim brothers, and here we go also into domestic politics, because Egypt is afraid of the Muslim brothers, and Saudi Arabia is afraid of the Muslim brothers. So here, I think my message is here that you play on both systems, because you agree, because you have the European, as you said, we will somehow manage to counter. Do you think that Greece will also play a role here in the Middle East? At least, how did Obama say?
Europeans or the Greeks?
The Greeks. I'm talking about the Greeks. I'm talking about the Greeks because the Greeks are here it concerns them. They're playing. This is a very interesting situation where they play in two systems where there is a hegemonic. And that's what there really is, the Ukrainian and the Middle Eastern wars. These are two hegemonic moves that happen. So I think that you should start thinking. Start thinking
Kostas,
about
do you take the challenge?
No. Actually,
Not especially because
In a-
you're in a position where
in
you
a
can,
nutshell.
where you can,
Yeah.
when you are. That's why I looked at your.
Allah,
You're in a position where you can influence these.
okay. This is what I would have said had my proposal for a topic.
You
But
finally get the chance.
I will not. I will use a couple of minutes and not another hour. Okay, Turkey is a big country.
It's a big army.
A big army, a big economy, almost $1 trillion. It has many advantages. Its location, the perception of, especially what is a very strong currency that Turkey has is the perception of its geopolitical importance to the West, and not only the West but the West. So the United States have been at odds with Turkey, have imposed sanctions. They have come to they played a very positive role in helping Greece to balance out Turkish threat since 2020, and that was also instrumental in Ankara's, if you like, backtracking. But its most important advantage, along with a modern, very powerful army, along with the geography, is, as I said, the perception of its significance to the West. So the problem for Greece and for Israel, to some extent, because in the case of Israel, hopefully you will keep enjoying the American guarantee. That will not change. And that's a great asset. That's a great asset beyond your own capabilities. It's that, the Americans and the Europeans, they don't want to lose Turkey. And this is something that Ankara knows very well, and they have been pushing for some time now. Not just now, but since the early 2000s, actually, when they refused the Americans access to the American base in Incirlik, and they paid no price. They are too important in the minds, in the strategic analysis and assessment of people in Washington and in Paris and in Berlin and elsewhere. So we cannot afford. That's the thing. We cannot afford to lose Turkey. So we better engage with someone who's not reliable, with someone who we know that they played us against our competitors, but it's better that way. So this is a big dilemma, a big challenge for the United States, for Europeans, and of course it's an existential thing for Greece, because we're trying to keep a functional deterrence capability against Turkey, but we cannot afford to outspend them. We don't have the money. We don't have the demographic also factors to compete with them. So we have to be smart. But the the fallout, the Greek-Turkish fallout since 2019. Even before that, but 2019 was a landmark year with Turkey signing the memorandum for delimitation of exclusive economic zone with Libya. That was a wake-up call for Greece. And what we have been doing, and you know that, and I think you will agree, is that Greece, for the first time in its history, has a much wider strategic gaze. So we looked at balancing out Turkish not only hard capabilities, but diplomatic posturing by opening up to Israel, to Saudi Arabia, to Emiratis, even to India. And you can understand why India is important, because it's Pakistan, which is the most, the closest ally of Turkey. So Greece has come of age strategically in many senses. But ultimately,
support the Kurds. Support the Kurds on the stage. No.
That's
From a Greek point of view, from balancing. Again, I believe it's true.
I could no. My answer, at least for Greece, is no. No, it's not sell them out. We have never been supportive of them because we are.
Don't be
No. We are as a matter of principle, and because of the Cyprus issue, we're against any how can I put it?
They can get to the.
No.
Undermining statehood.
Exactly.
Undermining statehood.
Territorial integrity.
Yes, and we do not really think of that the enemy of your enemy is your friend, is works across the board.
Okay, on this note, thank you very much to Kostas Ifantis. It was a pleasure listening to you. I'm very happy you came to us. And good evening to everybody from Jerusalem.